Group.
Are you looking to establish? And we're back. You're listening to IBGR, the International Business Growth Radio Network, heard in 181 countries around the world. And we talk 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We talk about business news, business insights, business tools. What is that all designed to do? Help you start faster, start more successfully, help you with growth, and grow your company to its fullest capacity. And when it's time to leave the company, how do you make sure that you get what it's worth? And what do? We do that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, directed at entrepreneurs, business owners, solopreneurs, and those of you in the gig economy. And then finally, the R of IBGR is radio. Now, we've got show notes that we do for every show, and for a particular reason, that is we want you to be able to take it beyond just listening. So go to the website, ibgr.network. That is ibgr.network. When you get there, that's our homepage. Navigation bar, you'll see across the page on the right-hand side, you see resources, mouse over. Show notes is what you want. Click, open, and then I'll help you from there. Now, this is our second segment of today, or podcast number 30, depending upon how you're listening to us. Now, if you get to the page and you don't see Show 8, Global and Domestic Economic Update, then what you need to do is over in the search bar, is put that in. Show 8, Global and Domestic Economic Update. Boom, up this will pop. Now, what we did in the first segment, you're going to have to go back and listen to it, is we talked about real economic activity. This is the latest results published by the Federal Reserve in the United States, and this came from the Dallas Bank. Now, what they do is even though it's U.S.-centric, they do look at the world. Now, what we did is we talked about real economic activity, gross domestic product, and industrial production. Now what we're going to be talking about is price indicators. So in episode 30, all right, so what are we going to talk about? Well, we're going to talk about the changes in the price level of a basket of goods, services, purchases by households. So what they've done in the past to come up with the CPI is they said, okay, what are the things that people typically buy? Now, I got to tell you that what they've done is they've taken some stuff out of there that should have remained. And this is where you can kind of get into is this economics or politics, but we'll leave it at that, okay? So first one is that when we get into the CPI, Consumer Price Index, and that is, let's talk about what's in that basket of goods that they have designated and say, here are the 10 things, for example, we're going to look at. Then number two is that we're going to look at changes in that price level, purchased by households, excluding food and energy. All right, so now you've got that in there. And then finally, we're going to be looking at the level of prices received by domestic producers for their goods and services. So we're going to take a look at these three. And as you can see, using the color coding that we used previously, green says it's good, red says it's not good, and black means we don't know yet. Okay, because a lot of times economic factors are kind of like, I'm not sure how to go with this. So, for example, with CPI, is CPI up because of inflation, or is it up because of we're coming out of a contraction and demand is going up, and this is a healthy price increase? We don't know that yet. Okay, so let's take a look at the CPI. And what we have here is a chart that's been tracking, a metric that's been tracking at about 8% being the max and minus 2% being the lowest up until we ran into 2018, 2019. And then what happened is the Consumer Price Index went up in some places almost up to 16%. Now, what does this mean? Well, what is happening here is that prices have been steady up until COVID. I mean, the graph I'm looking at does not break it down by months, but if you look at this as a year, which is the way I'm getting the data, is that COVID kind of changed everything. What it did is because this is an artificial constraint. And so what happened was that inflation, as it's looking at inflation now, its definition of inflation is different than the one I would use. The one I would use is inflation is a very technical term for those of us who are more Austrian in our economic view. That's a school, it's not a country, it's a school of thought that says inflation, the word inflation, should only be used for what happens when you produce or print too much money with nothing backing it. The way they're using it is that yes, demand and a decrease in supply, then the price is going to go up. They're going to call that price inflation. We don't. But that's an inside baseball. So what we got here is that we have a situation where it went way up, and then as all the countries were coming out of COVID and people were able to produce this, then the index came down for inflation. And because what happened is people started making it again, and therefore what you had is demand has never returned to 2019 levels, but it's certainly returned to levels better than 2020. And so what's happened is that now that the manufacturing can reopen, go back to work, etc., they can come back and meet that demand. Now, right now, the situation that we're in is that the world and the U.S. are up on it, but they're not up a lot, and it's kind of a neutral reading depending upon how you interpret or define inflation. Okay, the next one we're going to look at is core CPI inflation and see maybe here we can get a better answer. And again, this is a publication that comes out monthly. I mean, as a business owner, you can do this. All right, so now what we're looking at is core CPI inflation excluding food and energy. Now, what I find interesting is that in the United States, at least, the major place where there is food and energy inflation is here. And I'm going to use their term, which means any price increase and not my term. Now, if you think about what's happened, is that we have shut down, in 2020, let's go to 2019, because 2020 almost the entire year is consumed by COVID. Let's go to 2019. The United States is energy independent. Now, the significance of that is simple. There's not a single thing in the United States economy, or anybody's economy, for the most part, in the developed nations that does not have a significant energy content into it. Let's take food. Okay? Great example is food. You have fertilizers, got petroleum products in it. You have pesticides, have petroleum products in it. The tractors that have to operate to lay the seed and to harvest all use petroleum products. Then they have to be shipped, whether they go by rail or it goes by truck. It's got to be shipped. And so what you can see is that at every step along the way, for food, as an example, there is energy costs. So if energy is going up, it's just not, if energy goes up 10%, it hasn't just gone up 10% in one place. It's gone up 10% in every place. Now, it doesn't compound itself out to where 10 areas, 10% is 100%. But if energy is up 10%, at the end of the day, when you go buy it at the store, I can guarantee you it's not up 10%. It's probably up more like 18, 19, 20%. All right? And so what is interesting here is on this graph, core CPI inflation is up, excluding the major areas that are experiencing the most inflation. Now, their interpretation of the chart would be that the data here is saying that what you have is the inverse of what we talked about in the previous one, is that now that the people are now building again, is that the prices have shot back up to where they need to be. The challenge with that is they're already higher than in any other period except for let me see here, the emerging countries coming out of the contraction of 2008. And what we mark this as I'm reading this, is it's red. It's a negative. Okay, that's how I'm reading it. You can come up with your own if you like. And then finally, the last one is PPI, Producer Price Index. Okay. Now, what's good about this one is it's like industrial production, is that it is a reasonably good predictor of what's going to happen. And we would call this a leading indicator. And so what you have here is producer price index, PPI, is up everywhere. As a matter of fact, there is almost no difference between the United States or the world average or emerging economies and developed economies. Right now, what we're looking at is a PPI of 12%. Now, what does that mean? That means that is 12% upstream. That means that 12%, all of it or a certain part of it, has not been felt by the consumer yet. In other words, if we did this a month ago, let's say we did it 3 months ago, and it was up 10%, that 10% increase you have felt by now. This 12% increase that I'm looking at here across the board isn't going to be felt for another couple of months. But this is way up, and it's almost as bad as 2008. Okay, so that's where we stand there. So if we go back to our chart, what we have here is we have two that are, I'm going to leave them neutral, even though I don't like where the PPI is. Again, I don't know how they're, well, I do know how they're using, how they are defining inflation. And so therefore, I'm going to leave the CPI and the PPI as neutral right now, where the core CPI inflation is negative. So what we have, if we go through, we look at the first two, episode 29, or our first segment, we had the world up on GDP and the U.S. down. On IP, industrial production, we had both the U.S. and world down. Here, of the three items, two are neutral and one is negative. So if you look at it right now, is that we are trending negative. Now, when we come back from the break, what we're going to do is we're now going to look at some trade indicators. And trade indicators, though, speaks to the United States. But one of the reasons why it is really a global metric is that the United States is a net importer of goods and services. All right, if you're a country, if you're outside of the United States, the relationship you want to have with us is to sell here. The United States is not a net exporter, and that has not been true since our economy changed. And very quickly, right now in the United States, if you look at our gross domestic product and you split that between production and services, 70% of the gross domestic product in the United States comes from services, only 30% from production. It's hard to sell worldwide services, but it's very easy to sell worldwide products. I'll leave it there. Go nowhere. This is IBGR. The show is show number 8 Global.